My name is Victoria Young, and the note was folded so small it could have been a seed. I felt it only by accident. The way a fingertip finds the smooth bead hidden in the lining of a purse. A crisp corner, the whisper of paper against fabric. An intrusion that did not belong among loose change and receipts and the peppermint I kept. For the taste of steadiness. I had just left Dr. Isaacson's office, 3rd floor, East Wing. The corridor smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and anxious breath, and I was walking toward the elevator, when the note slipped against my knuckles as if it wanted to be discovered. The fluorescent lights had a way of making everyone look like a ghost. The elevator doors sighed open and I stepped inside with a man in a steel gray suit, and a toddler hammering a plastic dinosaur against his father's knee. Floor numbers blinked their amber countdown. I pinched the folded square between my fingers, more curious than afraid, and unfolded it with a care that felt ceremonial. Run from your family now. No salutation, no exclamation mark. The letters were blocky, deliberate. A nurse's charting hand disguised as urgency. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I simply refolded the note along the same creases and slipped it beneath my phone, and then I watched my reflection in the smudged metal panel. A woman of 48, apricot blouse, small gold pendant. The carved lines at the corners of my eyes that had arrived when my daughter started driving, and my mother started forgetting the name of the street she had lived on for 30 years, when the ground floor opened. The man in the steel gray suit hurried out with his storm of cologne, and the toddler announced triumphantly, "Dino." As though the world had just been invented, I walked through the lobby, past the potted ficus with its plastic glare, past the volunteer in the too large cardigan knitting something bright and patient, and into the afternoon heat that wrapped me like a damp towel. The sky was a hard blue. Cars glided by with the indifferent purpose of fish. Somewhere a siren drew a red line through the day. I did not run. I went to the parking garage and stood by my car, and watched my hands on the keys as though they belonged to a careful stranger. It was only once I was inside with the door closed that I let my mouth shape around a small, private laugh, the kind you give to superstition when no one else is there to hear. Because my family was fine, wasn't it? There are many versions of family. There is the one that sends text messages with confetti when your lab results come back normal. There is the one that forgets your birthday but remembers your shoe size. There is the one that calls at midnight because their radiator is making a sound like God's anger, and they cannot sleep without your voice. There is the family at the Sunday table passing salt and grief like shared bread, looking up only when the light hits the glass just right. Mine was the sort that had learned to survive on the performance of normal. My husband, Daniel, who managed risk for a living and fear as a hobby with his ironic, beautiful mouth and his calendar grid like a chessboard, he always won. My daughter, Grace, 21 and all elbows and sharpened opinions, home from college for the summer with a suitcase of thrifted cardigans, and a posture that folded into itself whenever she saw a version of me who disappointed her. My mother, Ruth, who shuffled through the rooms of her small house with the careful grace of a dowager saving energy. Until evening, my brother, exiled to a city 2 hours away by the taxidermy of his own choices, calling when the moon was bright as a receipt, and he needed to hear our mother ask again, "And who is this now?" so that he could hate me for being the one who lived closer. But that was a catalog. A list doesn't hold a pulse. A family is what you feel moving in the room after the door is shut. I put the note on the passenger seat like a parking ticket, and drove home with my thoughts arranged like jars on a shelf. In the rear view, my eyes were the eyes I had used to soothe the fever, devour a book, appraise a stranger at a party, count back change in the years when I worked a register at the hardware store, and learned what men buy when they want to fix something they cannot name at a red light. I unfolded the note again and held it up to the sun as if some secret watermark might appear. A medical letterhead, an apology. The paper showed only its own stubborn whiteness. Run from your family now. The words were the color of a scab. You might wonder why I didn't march back into that office and slam the note down. I have wondered too. I think, if I am honest, I did not want to allow the world to become the sort of place where a doctor would write such a thing. It felt like treason against comprehension. It felt like a dare. At home, the house rested in its afternoon hush. Our street was one of those suburban cul-de-sacs that looked like a hand open to the sky. Sunlight wore itself thin on the carpet. The kitchen smelled faintly of last night's curry turmeric, like the ghost of a bright idea. On the fridge, a magnet announced, "Proceed as if success is inevitable." The magnet came with the mortgage, I think, or maybe I bought it on a day when I needed to believe that a sentence could hold up a life. I tucked the note beneath the sugar jar. I stood there, staring at the jar as though it were a witness I had sworn in. And then I set water to boil for tea, because no calamity can find its footing in a kitchen that smells of bergamot. I am my mother's daughter. Tea is what you do with terror when you still have time to fold napkins. It was on the second steep that I realized the note had not said, "Run," it had said, "Run from your family now." This was not the universal panic of a fire alarm. This was a map with an X scratched over the place I called home. It was a surgeon's incision right through the old stories we were keeping ourselves alive on. The phone chimed. "Grace, Dad and I are at the dealership. He wants me to see how it feels to sit in something that costs more than tuition. Bring up the old debate later because I know you'll want to, XO." I smiled despite myself. Grace used kisses like punctuation. She was not cruel. She was a girl with a brain that charged interest. I texted back, "Be kind to the salespeople. They survive on weather and hope." She responded with a selfie, her in aviator sunglasses. Daniel behind her looking like the angel of depreciation. The angle made her nose seem too assertive and his jaw too soft. I studied the photo like it might confess. I poured tea and carried the cup to the dining room where the piano lived, Daniel's grandmother's piano, technically. A squat upright with varnish the color of tobacco and ivory keys that had remembered too many songs. When Grace was 5, she had fallen asleep beneath it during a storm, the pedals like bronze hooves beside her ears. In the years after, she practiced scales that turned to Chopin and then stopped entirely, the bench becoming a place to set stacks of things we meant to read. I tucked the note inside the old piano bench among the yellowed sheet music, telling myself that paper belongs with paper, even the kind that feels like a burn. I sat down and opened the lid and played a clumsy run of notes. Music sounded like a confession that didn't care if you forgave it. We keep instruments in our homes because we want proof that beauty is possible without an audience. The room gathered itself around me. The afternoon softened as if someone had breathed on the glass of time. When the front door opened, I let the note scatter and stood. Daniel's voice came first, helium light from some joke he had made to the neighbor, then his step. Confident, the cadence of a man who had learned to be listened to. Grace followed with the gust of a story. "I told him we're just looking," she said, emerging with a brochure like a passport, and he said, "That's what everybody says before they buy," and I said, "That's what con artists say about trust." Daniel kissed my cheek, dry skin, a hint of coffee, and slid his hand to my waist with an intimacy that was almost polite. "We weren't buying," he said. "She only wanted to sit in the leather and give capitalism a lecture." He tapped the brochure. "But if success is inevitable, as your magnet insists, tease on," I said. We sat at the counter while the house learned our 3-part rhythm again. Grace's hair smelled of rain though the day was bone dry. Daniel skimmed his email. With the look of a man checking a wound for infection, he said, "How was the appointment?" "Fine," I said, which is the word we use when the truth is not ready to be carried. "What did Isaacson say about the dizzy spells?" Daniel's eyes did not lift from the screen. "That I should drink more water." I lied gently. This wasn't the first time I gave a softened version of news, nor would it be the last. Marriage is a series of edits. Some of them save the sentence. Some remove the subject. Grace watched me with the kind of attention that feels like a dare. "Mom," she said, "I can always tell when you are walking around a hole instead of admitting you don't know how deep it is." "Poetry," Daniel said. "She inherited your metaphors. I inherited your appetite for secrets," she said. They moved through our kitchen with the practiced choreography of two people who loved each other the way cousins do, fondly, with a knowledge of old stories, but relieved not to have to live together forever. I felt the shape of the note in The house, even though I had hidden it. I felt it like a splinter you cannot see but cannot stop worrying. That evening, when the sky went the color of a bruise healing, I drove to my mother's house with leftover curry in a lidded bowl and a jar of the cookies Grace had made when insomnia visited. My mother's porch light had a halo that made moths into saints. She opened the door with her cardigan bunched at the elbows, her lipstick slightly brave. "Victoria," she said, the syllables landing on the floor between us as if they might break. "You come to set my clocks right, don't you?" "The kitchen insists it is. I'll talk to it," I said, and she laughed in that startled way hers did now. The kind of laugh that sounded like a friend you did not expect to see waving from across the street. She sat with the bowl in her lap, sniffing the curry as though the story of it might rise up and tell her what to do. "Your father used to say the smell of turmeric is what keeps sorrow from staying for breakfast." She blinked. "He didn't know anything about spices," she added, just as she always did. "The ritual comforts us when memory will not," while her microwave hummed. She showed me the stack of mail, the flyer about gutters she had circled as if it were a love letter, the scratch-off card from a contest for a car she did not want and could not drive. Her hands were still small and brown and perfectly competent when they were not betraying her. "Mom," I said gently, "did anyone come by today?" "A repairman, a nurse, everyone comes by," she said. "The birds are building cities out front." A woman with a clipboard tried to convince me God writes in cursive. "And your brother called to ask if I remembered teaching him to fold a fitted sheet, and I told him I only taught you that because he never listened." "Did he sound all right?" "He sounded like a boy who forgot his umbrella and is pretending he likes rain." She looked at me. "And you sound like someone carrying an invisible suitcase." I thought of the note folded among the scales. "And preludes, just tired," I said. "Doctor says to drink more water." Doctors say many things when they run out of the useful ones. After I set her kitchen clock to a believable time and filled her pill organizer for the week, I sat with her while she ate. She ate as though she were paying the world a compliment. She asked about Grace. She asked about Daniel. She asked about my father, then caught herself, then asked again. And I answered each time as if it were new, because grief is only rude when it insists on being noticed. When I left, she pressed a folded bill into my hand as though I were a maid. "For your trouble," she said. "Don't tell the union. This is $5, I said. "I'm not made of money." "You're made of something better." "Turmeric," she asked. Pleased to have remembered a word. "Turmeric," I said. On the drive home, the radio played a song that sounded like the memory of a promise. The streets were quiet, windows glowed like ovens. In one house, a tall man danced alone in his living room, arms overhead, and I thought, this is how we survive. We do small foolish things privately until our hearts believe us again. At home, Daniel was in the office with his headset on, his voice trimmed to professional simplicity. Grace was on the couch reading a book with a title that sounded like an accusation. I went to the piano and lifted the bench lid and took out the note as carefully as if it were a live thing that might bite. In my bedroom, I slid open the drawer where I kept the things I called papers when I needed to sound competent. Insurance cards, the title to the car, a photograph of my father holding me as a baby, a letter Grace had written me the summer she hated me most. I don't know how to say this without sounding dramatic, but sometimes you are the only person who makes the world feel like a book I know how to read. I tucked the note beneath the letter as if goodness could weigh down fear. That night, I dreamed I was in the hospital again, but the hallways were a funhouse, the floor sloping up like a ramp to heaven. I kept trying to find the door that led to Dr. Isaacson's office, but each door opened onto a room where my family stood in silence, holding placards with my secrets printed in big black letters, a parade of knowing. I woke with my mouth dry and the ceiling fan counting slowly through the hours. Morning came with a light that made everything look like it had been forgiven. I made oatmeal. I sliced strawberries with the precision of a person choosing her future. Grace stumbled in with the look of a girl who had been translating dreams back into the spare language of waking. Daniel tied his tie while checking a stock alert on his phone. We were a portrait of American repair food work, youth, the rituals That tell the day what to do. I waited until the second cup of coffee to say it. Did either of you slip something into my bag at the doctor's yesterday? Daniel frowned the way men frown when a chess piece is not where they left it. No. Why would I do that? Grace looked up, curious. What kind of something? Note, I said, trying to sound amused, telling me to run from my family. Grace barked a laugh that was at least half real. That is either an art project or a manifesto. May I see? I brought the note. Daniel took it first, turning it over like a detective in a television show. And I watched the way his mouth thinned, the way the skin at his temple tugged. Grace sniffed it, which made me love her absurdly. Smells like paper, she said. I vote we frame it, or at least put it on the fridge with a success magnet. It's not funny. Daniel said, who did this? Maybe a nurse with a sense of humor, Grace said. Maybe an advocate overcoming shyness, she squinted, or someone who noticed something you don't want us to know. Grace, I said gently, but she was right to say it. Daniel set the note down as though he could break it that way. We should call the clinic. Ask who handled your things. Who handled my things? I echoed. I imagined calling the front desk and saying, yes, hello. Did anyone at your facility kindly warn me to abandon my loved ones? It seems dramatic. Dramatic is a message like this. He looked at me. Are you being serious, Vic? It was in your bag. You didn't? Drop it on a bus. I don't take buses, I said, hearing how small the sentence sounded. Grace reached for the note again and traced the N and now with her fingernail. I keep thinking about the word run, she said, because it might mean run as in flee. But it also might mean run as in a ladder and a stocking, something unraveling. She glanced at me, or run as in for office, you finally becoming dictator of this household. God forbid, Daniel said. But he was watching me with the careful suspicion people reserve for those they love. Is there something you haven't told me yet? Is there something about to be told whether you want to or not? I did not tell them. About the dizzy spells that were not spells but a series of small, exact vanishings. How the world would occasionally tilt like a glass deciding to spill. How sounds would stretch thin as taffy and then snap. I did not tell them about the scam that had looked like the moon showing its bad side. Or about the way Dr. Isaacson had held the door with his hip when he left the room. As if he wanted his hands visible to the gods, I did not tell them how his eyes had wandered to my wedding ring. Not in flirtation, but as a patient might glance at a nurse when the needle breaks beneath the skin. What I said was, the receptionist had nails like dagger tips. Maybe she snagged my bag and grabbed a scrap from the trash to hold the loop. Maybe that scrap had writing on it. Maybe I am telling a story because it is better than the alternative. What alternative? Daniel asked. That someone thinks. I need to run. Grace leaned back in her chair and looked at us like a jury might, knowing both the law and the gossip. Well, she said, if the guy at the dealership writes me a note that says by now, I'm not going to obey without thinking. Same with this. Daniel lifted his cup. To not obeying without thinking, we clinked, the day pretending it could be ordinary, and then the world knocked, the doorbell rang. And in that innocent ring was the sound of a verdict. Daniel went to answer it with the casual authority of a king, answering a servant and then stayed away longer than a delivery should require. I wiped my hands, suddenly aware of the tilt inside the room, and followed. Grace trailed behind me. Curious as a cat, a man stood at our door with a smile that was all gums and salesmanship. His suit was the precise shade of regret. Mrs. Young? He asked, and I nodded. Good morning, I'm from Aegis Home Services. We're here to install the new locks. We didn't order locks, Daniel said, stepping into the doorway like a gate that had learned to speak. The man consulted a clipboard. You sure? Work order says, emergency replacement, immediate. We got the call this morning from a Dr. Isaacson. He pointed to the line of chicken scratch. See, says to put a rush on it, says, and I quote, don't leave until the deadbolt is reinforced. Grace looked at me, Daniel looked at me. The day changed its clothes. Come in, I said. Surprising myself, Vic, Daniel said under his breath. No, we can stand in the hall. I said to the locksmith, who took a step back, politeness rearranged by uncertainty. Give me a second. I closed the door and turned to my husband and my daughter. Their faces like two chapters of the same book. He's not making that up, I said. The doctor did something. He put that note in my bag and he sent a man to strengthen our door. Grace folded her arms. This is either the best prank of the decade or the beginning of a very weird novel. Daniel ran a hand down his face and sighed. Okay, he said. Okay, we call the clinic. We verify. And if Isaacson really did this, he's going to have to explain why he thinks my wife is living in a thriller. I called. The hold music was the kind of piano that believes it is saving lives. When the receptionist came on, her voice had the brisk confidentiality of someone who has said the word HIPAA so often it has lost all meaning. Dr. Isaacson is with a patient, she said twice. Then, can I take a message? And finally, when I insisted, 1 moment, Mrs. Young, he came on like a storm trying to be polite. Victoria, doctor, I said. Did you send a locksmith to my house? He was silent long enough for me to hear the distant squawk of a printer. Yes, he said carefully. Why? Because, he said, and then he lowered his voice. Because you need to listen to me very precisely now, wherever you are. I want you to make an excuse, step outside and walk. Do not look back. Do not gather anything you cannot carry. Do not leave a note. Do not announce. Just walk. Keep walking until you are in a place with people, then call me again from there. The house was suddenly too small for air. Grace watched my face with an intensity that felt like a hand on my shoulder. Daniel mouthed, "What?" And I shook my head. Minutely, not because I did not know, but because sometimes it is the only gesture left when a decision is trying to be born. Why? I managed. Because your test results are not just your test results, he said quietly, because someone else has been accessing your records. Because there is a code attached to your file that should not be there. Because the scans don't match the symptoms you described to me in the room. But they match something else, something someone else described in a previous appointment. That was never recorded under your name, because it is the kind of error that is not an error, because when I walked you out yesterday, the man you think is your husband was standing too close to the charting station, asking questions no spouse asks. Unless he is also your proxy power of either fear or money, because I have seen this before and the last time I hesitated. The woman ended up on a ventilator with a diagnosis that looked right on paper and wrong in her eyes. My heart went perfectly still. The kind of stillness that signals the body to begin again because the old way has failed. You're mistaken, I said, without believing myself. Run from your family now, he said softly, as if admitting. A prayer, please. The line hummed. In the next room, the locksmith knocked again, tentative. Grace's book slid from her lap to the rug without her noticing. Daniel's jaw worked. A fist trying to open. I ended the call. I looked at the man I had been married to for 24 years, the father of my daughter, the handler of risk and of me. I saw in him everything I had ever loved, his patience when Grace broke her arm at 7. And he slept beside her on the hospital cot, his hand steady on the steering wheel during road trips. The way he trimmed the rose bushes as if coaxing them to speak, and I saw what I had avoided seeing, a calculation behind his kindness, the ledger in his eyes. Let them change the locks, I said, and then I need to go for a walk. Victoria, he said. My name a warning, I need to walk, I repeated, folding my voice around the truth as if it were a hot stone that would cool if I didn't. Drop it, I need to think, and I can't think with all of us breathing the same worry. Grace stepped between us without seeming to. I'll go with you, she said. No, I said. And I realized how much of me had already decided. Stay. Watch the locksmith. Be kind to the salespeople of fate. I picked up my bag. Daniel moved as if to take my wrist and then didn't. Because you learn when you are married that some gestures are landmines. I opened the door to the locksmith, who smiled with relief and said, "We'll be quick," and then I stepped past him into the bright, ordinary day. I walked the way you do when the world is 1 degree hotter than truth, past the manicured lawns and the flags that told their small lies about belonging, past a boy kicking a soccer ball against a garage, the thump like a heart learning the rules, past the woman who always ran at noon as if she were married to the sun. I walked until the houses ended and the little strip mall began, with its nail salon and its vape shop and the coffee place, where the menu treats milk like an ideology. I went inside the coffee place and sat at the far table beneath the chalkboard. Where teenagers drew mountains, my hands were steady, my breath discovered a rhythm. I called Dr. Isaacson back, and when he answered, relief broke across his voice like weather. Good. He said, now listen. I listened. He told me what he had seen in my chart. He told me about the code attached, a code that flagged me as a participant in a decision I had never made. He told me about a medication order he had canceled because it did not fit the test results he trusted, the ones he ordered while I sat in a gown that refused to meet in the back. He told me about the way Daniel had lingered near the desk, the carefully innocent questions, the insistence that he be texted all updates because my phone was unreliable, and my memory even more so. He told me about the last patient whose chart had been altered, and how her family had looked grateful to have an answer right up until the answer made her worse. He told me he could be wrong, that paranoia is a disease in physicians, but that sometimes you save a life by acting on a story you cannot yet publish. When he was done, my coffee was cold and people around me were discussing a series of small futures. A vacation deferred, a job interview. The world was still salaried in possibility. Okay. I said, okay. He echoed, what do I do? Do you have somewhere you can go? He asked. Someone who will not be the first person your husband calls to ask whether you are there? I thought of my mother, who would open the door to anyone with the password turmeric. I thought of my brother, who would turn my emergency into his emergency and then invoice me emotionally. I thought of the woman I used to work with at the hardware store who had once said, if you ever need a shed to hide in, I've got one with your name on it. Jokes are maps. I have someplace. I lied, and then I said, I'll find someplace. Don't go back yet, he said, not until we know who has been writing your story for you, my story. I said, tasting the possessive. That's right. I sat there for a long time, my phone face down, the note folded square inside, my bag like a talisman. And I tried to calculate the precise moment when a life turns into its next version. There is never just one. There are hundreds. There's the moment you lie lightly to your husband, the moment you withhold a symptom, the moment you keep a note. The moments gather until they gallop. If you are wise, you call that gallop by its proper name, salvation. When I finally stood, the barista, the one with the pierced eyebrow and the tired tenderness of someone who knows how to listen, handed me a small paper bag. You left this, they said. I didn't order anything else, I said. Someone paid for it and said to make sure you took it with you. They smiled. He said you'd know. I opened the bag. Inside was a bottle of water and a protein bar and a sticky note that read, please hydrate and do not faint in a parking lot. I laughed, but it sounded like something else. I drank the water in long, obedient swallows. I ate half the bar. I felt my body remember itself. I did not yet know that, by nightfall, the locks on our doors would be the least of our protection. I did not yet know about the password on my medical file. The one Daniel would insist had always been there. The one that turned out to be a date that was not our anniversary, but the day I had told him once in a whisper that I wanted to leave. I did not yet know how quickly a family becomes a character in someone else's novel. I was only a woman in a coffee shop, 48 years old, my hair pinned back against the day, my heart stubbornly familiar inside its bone house, preparing to run not away from love but toward the version of it that would not kill me. I stood, shouldered my bag, and stepped back into the light. I walked to the bus stop even though I do not take buses. I stood beneath the plexiglass shelter and read the ads, a dentist promising kindness, a college promising reinvention, a realtor promising the world in exchange for a signature that would follow you into sleep. The bus came with a sigh and a kneel, and I stepped on with the startled bravery of a person who has decided to be ordinary for an hour. I sat halfway back, where anonymity feels most honest, and held my bag with both hands like something alive might hatch from it. Cities unfold differently when you are a passenger. Houses reveal their backsides, alleys become biographies. Windows offer their unscripted faces, a woman brushing a dog, a teenage boy rehearsing an apology, a man in a bathrobe watering the same plant twice. I counted the stop names like beads in a rosary, Larkspur, Union, the Commons, Stadium. When the bus turned down Maple, I pressed the cord. That tender yellow line that gives you permission to change your life. I got off across from the library. It is a kind of church, a library, and I say that as a lapsed believer in everything but books. The building sat broad-shouldered and calm, its windows reflected cloud. Inside, the air smelled of paper and a very specific ambition. People were bent over tables like pilgrims. A woman behind the information desk wore a lanyard studded with pins, tiny owls. A kept reading a novel, a typewriter with a heart instead of a letter. She greeted me with the same warm neutrality she would have extended to a billionaire or a runaway. I loved her instantly for that. Computer, she asked. Table, I said. And a corner that pretends I'm invisible, she pointed. I found a table under a painting of a maple tree that always looked like October. I took out a notebook because paper feels safer than screens when the world is electric. Page 1, write down what you know. I put the date at the top because people who leave know to do that. We measure the distance from the moment we stepped outside. Point 1, there is a note 2. There is a doctor who sent a locksmith. 3, there is a husband who was too close to the charting station. 4, there is a code on my file that was not there yesterday morning. 5, my mother will forget this conversation before dinner. 6, Grace will not. I stared at the list until the words looked like tiles from different rooms. I thought of Daniel's careful mouth, of the message on our fridge. Proceed as if success is inevitable, and wondered who had defined success for U.S., where we had signed the contract, whether there had been a janitor whispering, don't sign this. As in those stories where salvation arrives disguised as humility. My phone buzzed. Daniel, where are you? Not a question, exactly, a gate with a sensor. I put the phone face down. Another buzz, please call. Then another, we need to talk about what you told the clinic. And another. Minutes later, is this about Grace? That one annoyed me. He never could let a narrative be about me for long. Grace. Texted separately, locksmith is a character out of a sitcom, but the deadbolt now looks like it could withstand a minor siege. Are you okay? Do you want me to meet you, or do you need to be a solo comet for a bit? I love you. Punctuation intended. I wrote back, solo comet for a bit. Read something that doesn't accuse the world. I love you more than turmeric, she sent. Back a heart, a laughing face, a tiny elephant for reasons I didn't ask. I searched my bag for the doctor's sticky note, the instruction to hydrate, and folded it into my wallet like a saint card. Then I opened the library laptop with tentative fingers and on the public computer, typed my own name into a search bar I did not fully trust. That is how desperate I felt, that I would Google myself like a freshman at Curiosity. Of course. Nothing new appeared, no secret indictment. No press release from the hospital, local woman flagged by her family. But the library's feed of public records did reveal a recent update to our home's insurance policy, Daniel's domain, and the note that a medical directive had been filed with our primary care clinic 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Daniel was in Houston for a conference that involved stake strategy and pictures of men in blue suits standing too close to one another. 2 weeks ago, I was helping my mother choose between two nearly identical cardigans and telling her the story of the first time I met Daniel, how he'd rescued my grocery bag from splitting, and said, very calmly, we can fix this, like a vow. It was not our anniversary. It was a quiet, unremarkable day. And into that quiet someone had slid a directive with my name on it. My chest felt boarded up, and then, just as quickly, windowed. I could see too much. I stood and drifted the way people do in libraries when they do not want to be looked at, which is to say, pretending to examine spines. I ran my finger down titles like they might answer in the medical ethics section. A book fell forward in that theatrical way books do when you are willing to be helped. I opened it randomly and read, Consent is a story told by two people who think they are saying the same words. I put the book back as if it might burn me and let my hand find a memoir instead. A woman surviving an ordinary betrayal and making a cathedral from it. When I returned to the desk, the librarian watched me. Without watching me. You look like you're deciding to become a myth, she said. which is a thing only librarians are allowed to say without sounding absurd. I'm deciding to become a person, I said. That's the same thing, she said, and handed me a slip with the name of a shelter printed discreetly at the bottom. If you ever need to spend a night becoming one safely, I'm okay, I said. And she nodded like the sun nods when you swear you don't need it. Round 4, I walked again. A storm was rehearsing behind the clouds, the sidewalk held the day's heat like a last thought. I cut behind the grocery because I have always loved the smell of cardboard and produce. And the sound of deliveries, something about the world replenishing itself. A boy broke down boxes with a practiced savagery. He sang under his breath like no one had ever told him not to. I envied him for that. I considered my options and found myself at the hardware store. The old one with the bell that rings not only when you enter but when you are forgiven for leaving. The front counter still bore the scorch mark from the time Mr. Patel put a coffee down on a light bulb that had been testing its heat. The pegboard still held 100 small solutions to embarrassingly specific problems. Behind the paint tinting station, Laurel still wore her hair in a bun so tight it could hold nails. Look what the ex-employee dragged in, she said, and came around to hug me with the arms of someone strong enough to lift a bag of cement. I need a shed, I said. I've got 3, she said. One you can assemble, one you can improvise. One you can hide inside of metaphorically. Third option, I said. She led me to the employees' only door without comment. In the back, between the pallets of salt and the shiny new wheelbarrows, there was a small office that had once been a closet. She opened it with a flourish. Inside, a chair, a lamp, a calendar whose pictures were all bridges at night. On the desk lay a guest book of sorts. Pages where employees had written things like, "This is where I decided to ask for a raise. This is where I cried when the truck was late. This is where I wrote a letter I never sent to someone who didn't deserve it but still got it." In a drawer, a jar of mints. On the wall, a photo of Laurel at 19, a hammer in her hand like a flag. "Stay as long as you like," she said. "The password for the Wi-Fi is nails and hope." I sat. The lamp hummed like a patient bee, and there, in that tiny room that smelled faintly of oil and possibility, I called my mother. She answered and said, delighted, "Oh, there you are. I was just telling the neighbor that my daughter comes on Tuesdays and fixes the clocks." "It's Tuesday," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Like an old recipe. Some steps I remember. Some I make up and hope nobody complains." "If anyone complains," I said, "tell them to cook it themselves." She laughed. "Ah, Victoria, when did you get so brave?" "Today," I said before I could stop myself. Then I called my brother, because I needed a baseline for his particular brand of failure. He answered on the 3rd ring with the noise of traffic behind him. "I'm on a job," he said, meaning he was driving someone's car for cash. "Do you know anything about medical directives?" I asked, like the thing where I tell them to keep me alive until the music stops, he said. I unchecked all the boxes because I don't want to inconvenience anyone. I'm being serious. "So am I. Why, you dying, maybe," I said, and listened to the silence that followed. It was almost a kindness. He cleared his throat. "What do you need?" "Just an answer," I said. "Has anyone asked you to sign anything for me? Has anyone asked questions about my health?" "You mean like Daniel?" he said, and said Daniel's name with the smooth contempt of someone who resents competence. "Yes." I said. "Nah," he said. "Last time I talked to him, he wanted to know if Mom's refrigerator was new enough to outlive us. That man could turn a funeral into a spreadsheet." I thanked him and hung up and felt a strange, grateful loyalty to his small cruelty. It told the truth about a part of Daniel I had explained away for years. He hadn't become careful, he had always been careful. I had simply mistaken his carefulness for care. I texted Grace again. "When you get a chance, look up our insurance file and see if anything changed. Don't ask Dad yet. Pretend you are casing a joint for a novel." She wrote back, already on it. "I've been bored and curiosity is cheaper than therapy." Storm finally arrived at 5. Rain slammed the roof like a correction. Laurel popped her head in and handed me a mug that said "World's okayest employee, trucks delayed." She said, "Stay, there's a blanket under the box of bungee cords if you get cold." "How did you know to keep this room?" I asked. "Because People need a place to decide, she said, and shut the door. I considered the possibility that I was overreacting. I considered the possibility that I wasn't reacting nearly enough. I thought about my first date with Daniel movie, Thai food. A walk past the river where we invented versions of ourselves. That would look good inside the pronoun we and about the way he had told me, years later, that he had chosen risk management. Because risk looks brave from a distance but up close is just paperwork. My phone buzzed. Grace, okay, weird. There is a new file in the insurance portal, a rider specifying experimental treatment coverage, with a list of medications so long I had to scroll twice. I recognized her from my pre-med seminar. They're for someone with a degenerative neurological condition, but not the kind you've been checked for. Also, the signature on the update is a digital stamp of yours, Mom. It looks like you authorized it. Date is 2 weeks ago. Lightning stitched its name across the sky. I stared at the message until the letters unhooked. I typed, do not confront him. Act as if you do not know, and then, because I am a mother and the first lullaby I ever sang held the line be safe, I added, please keep your phone charged. Keep something heavy near the door, don't laugh. Humor is a privilege of people who are not in a plot, she replied. I'm not laughing. I've put the cast iron skillet by the door like a pioneer. I am also making pasta because I handle terror with carbs. I smiled into the rain and wiped my face with my sleeve even though it was only water from the roof's old habit of finding its way through. It felt good to decide something, even if that something was only to postpone confrontation until I could gather a counterweight of facts. At dusk, when the storm had exhausted its rhetoric, I left the hardware store with Laurel's hug-like armor. The town looked rinsed. Cars wore beads of apology. I walked along the river path because water always tells me what to do. Keep moving. Change without announcing it. Reflect what you must and then carry it away. Halfway down the path, under the bridge where the echo makes even whispers sound like declarations, I saw him, Dr. Isaacson, standing with his hands in the pockets of a coat he didn't need in July. He looked like a man who does the right thing and then sits with the ache of it. Victoria, he said, and the relief in his voice made me think of the sticky note again. The small, practical care of it. You sent a locksmith, I said. I thought I was being paranoid. He said, then I saw that rider in your insurance and stopped thinking in favor of acting. How did you see the rider? He gestured toward the hospital's flood of windows upriver. I called a friend, she called a friend. The world is a braid of people who owe each other small favors. I'm aware of the boundaries I'm crossing. I'll apologize to them later if it turns out I'm wrong. And if you're right, I asked, then you and I will each have to live with being the kind of people who saved your life. That is not easy, but it is easier than the alternative. We stood with the river's wet murmurs filling the spaces our words avoided. He explained more, how the code on my file was one used for patients enrolled in research protocols. How? The initial order for medication had been placed and then canceled and then placed again overnight. How the pharmacy had called the clinic to confirm a dosage that made no sense for my charts, and perfect sense for a chart that belonged to a woman 10 years older, with a different last name, a woman whose husband had been overheard arguing with staff about timelines and money. A husband with a voice like Daniel's when he thinks someone is wasting his time. You think they merged me with her? I said, I think someone has decided your body is the easiest road to a solution, he said. I don't know who, I don't know why, I only know the pattern. We made a plan without calling it one. He would lock down my file at a second. Code that would trigger alarms if anyone altered anything without me present. Call in a social worker whose superpower was discretion. I would go to a hotel bland chain place near the highway where lives paused between versions and use. A name that belonged to my grandmother, Leela. I would not go home tonight. I would send Grace to her friend's apartment with a pretense about painting their shared nails. I would tell Daniel a lie kind enough to believe and big enough to hide inside of. Will he follow you? Isaacson asked. He has always followed me, I said softly. That is what marriage looked like for us. He followed me to be sure I went where he had drawn the map. And your daughter? She is learning to redraw maps, I said. She will be all right once I teach her that. The first pencil line is not the law. Dark pressed down gently, the way a hand does when it wants you to sleep. The river kept its counsel. I felt myself become both smaller and more solid. Like a stone you put in your pocket to remember where you've been. At the hotel, the clerk did not blink when I said, Leela Young one night. Because hotels understand everything without needing to understand anything. The room was an exact copy of every room I had ever stayed in on business trips with Daniel. Polyester comforter, art that offends no one, air conditioning loud enough to silence doubt. I sat on the bed and waited for my phone to shatter the quiet. First, Grace, I'm at Priya's, we're doing face masks the color of envy. I told Dad I needed a girls' night because the locksmith made me doubt the concept of doors. He said to be home by 10. I said sure, like someone who respects curfews. I'll stretch time if needed. Then Daniel, are you at your mother's? Locksmith is gone. I don't like that you left while strangers were in the house. This is not like you. I typed, I'm fine, needed air, staying with Mom tonight. She's unsettled by the locks. She wasn't. She didn't know about them. I'll be home tomorrow, love you. I watched the 3 dots appear and vanish. Then his reply, okay, kiss Mom, we'll talk in the morning. The words were simple, the trust. Assumed he is most dangerous when he sounds reasonable. I showered even though I was not dirty. Because water changes the math. After, I lay down on the stiff bed and stared at the ceiling that had seen 1,000 different versions of despair, joy, and mediocre television. I set 2 alarms in case the night tried to trick me. I tucked the doctor's sticky note under my pillow because rituals are stronger than we admit. And just as I turned off the lamp, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I answered with my voice held flat like a road, a whisper, you don't know me. But I'm the woman whose chart looks like yours. Do not come back to the clinic. They've moved the orders to the satellite pharmacy. He's pushing for morning. Who is this? I asked. But the line had already gone dead, leaving in my ear the sound of someone breathing a truth they were not allowed to own. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. Sleep is a truce. I was no longer interested in truces. At dawn, I watched the pale light pry open the seam of the blackout curtains. I made hotel coffee. That ritual punish and reward. I braided my hair with the quiet competence of a woman who has dressed for many roles and finally chosen one, witness to her own life. Then I texted Grace a single word ready, and got back a single word always. And I opened the door to the day that would require me to become the person the note imagined. The woman who runs, yes, but also the woman who turns, who faces, who insists that her story be written in her own hand. I woke before the alarm, the hotel curtains still sealed tight against morning. My phone was warm in my palm where I'd been holding it in sleep like a child clutching a toy. A single message glowed on the screen, sent at 3:47 a.m. from Grace. He's pacing, keeps checking the locks, keeps asking me why you'd lie about staying with Grandma. I pretended to fall asleep on the couch. Mom, he looks like he's rehearsing something in his head. The words pinned me upright. I texted back quickly, stay at Priya's until I tell you otherwise. Do not return home. If he insists, tell him Priya's mom locked the door and won't let you leave. Keep the skillet. Don't argue. Her reply came instantly. Copy that. Pioneer daughter reporting for duty. I pressed the phone to my forehead and let myself cry silently for 1 minute, no more. Then I washed my face in the tiny hotel sink and reminded my reflection. You are not prayed up by 8. I was back at the river path. The storm had left the ground soft, the air clean with the smell of iron. I waited under the bridge again, though this time the place felt like a stage I hadn't agreed to stand on. When Dr. Isaacson arrived, his coat damp at the shoulders, he carried a folder pressed close to his chest. I've locked your file, he said without greeting. But that won't hold long. If the person altering it has higher clearance, they'll find a way. I need to know if you're ready to take this to the board or even to the police. I thought of Daniel's careful hands trimming roses, of the way he said we when he meant I, of the directive filed in my name. If I go to the police, I said, they'll ask me why I stayed so long in a marriage where I kept mistaking control for care, and I don't know how to answer without sounding foolish. You answer, he said gently, by surviving. Foolishness doesn't survive, courage does. We walked together, not touching, like two people guarding the same secret. He handed me the folder. Inside were copies of everything, the altered orders, the timestamps, the medication list. At the bottom, in Daniel's neat electronic signature, my own name forged into consent. "You'll need allies," Isaacson said. "Not just me, someone outside the circle, someone who doesn't depend on him or on you." I thought of Laurel in the hardware store, of the librarian with her owl pins, of Grace with her cast iron skillet, small, ordinary saints scattered through my life, waiting to be asked. I nodded. That night I didn't go home. I drove instead to my mother's, sat on her porch swing, and listened to the creak as though it were telling me an old truth. Families can love you and still be the ones you must run from. My mother came to the door in her cardigan, smiling vaguely. "Victoria," she said, "I was just thinking of you. Do you want turmeric tea?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Yes, I do." And as she shuffled back into the kitchen, humming to herself, I opened the folder again and stared at the proof of how close I had come to being erased. The note in my bag was no longer a mystery, it was a commandment. And for the first time, I felt ready to obey it completely. I did not sleep at my mother's house. I lay on the couch under the crocheted throw that had weathered 5 winters into divorces, my eyes following the shadow of the ceiling fan. As it paddled the dark, the house hummed with the old appliances of a life, the refrigerator's patient breath, the water heater clearing its throat, the clock in the hall pronouncing each minute like a modest miracle. Every so often my mother stirred in her bedroom and called a name into the air, sometimes mine, sometimes my father's, once a dog we buried when I was 12. I answered softly each time, not because she could hear me but because I needed to hear myself answering. At dawn, I brewed turmeric tea that glowed like a promise. I kissed my mother's temple, tucked a note into her book. "Back soon, clocks are perfect, do not open for strangers," and slipped out before the day could decide for me. Laurel opened the hardware store early for the delivery truck and handed me a ring of keys, as if she'd been waiting to do it for years. "Office, back door, the secret stash where we keep the decent coffee," she said. "Use them or don't. Either way, there's a screwdriver in the drawer if you need to pry yourself out of anything." I tucked the keys into my pocket like fortune. The office smelled the way it always had, oil and lemon cleaner and a patience that felt like shelter. I spread out Isaacson's folder and the notes Grace had texted me overnight. Screenshots of the insurance rider, a glare-eyed photo of the cast iron skillet by the door. A single sentence that made my ribs widen with love. If they write your story, make them rhyme with you. Isaacson texted at 8. Satellite pharmacy confirmed a pickup scheduled under your name. For 10:15 a.m. I've delayed it once. I can't delay again without alerting whoever placed the order. If you can stand to be brave, we should be there first. Brave is a word people use when they want you to do something frightening. I told him yes anyway. I drove to the satellite pharmacy with the windows down as if that could make me faster. The plaza was the kind that tries to make you forget what used to be here: a field, a factory, a childhood, by offering frozen yogurt and a salon called *shine. The pharmacy's sign blinked half its letters, as if refusing to confess everything. Inside, the air smelled of plastic and peppermint. A woman at the register was arguing about a coupon that had expired in 2019. A teenage boy with acne like a constellation waited with his hands in the pockets of his sweatshirt and the door to his future half open. Isaacson waited near the blood pressure machine, looking like a man pretending to browse in order to keep the world from catching fire. When he saw me, the lines at the corners of his mouth loosened. "I've filed the alert," he murmured. "If someone tries to alter anything while we're here, it pings security upstairs and the board's liaison downtown. We won't be invisible today." "I've spent most of my life trying to be invisible when it was convenient for others," I said. "It feels wrong to stop and good to stop." We approached the counter together. The pharmacist, mid-30s, competent hair, eyes too tired for this hour, asked for my name without looking up, typed, paused, and then lifted her gaze like someone hearing a glass break in the next room. "One moment," she said. "I need to speak to a supervisor." "Of course," I said. as calmly as if she had asked us to wait for a perfect peach to ripen. The supervisor came in with a smile that had been taught to her by lawyers. "Mrs. Young," she said, "I'm afraid there's been some confusion with your order." "There's been more than confusion," Isaacson said in his doctor voice. "The one that turns rooms into courtrooms. There has been an attempt to dispense a medication that does not correspond to any documented diagnosis in her chart. I have placed a hold and a review request. We would like a printout of the order history and the chain of authorization." The supervisor hesitated. You could see the gears of policy grinding behind her eyes. "We typically don't." Isaacson slid a paper across the counter, the sort that folds origami-like into compliance board code. He said, "It's already triggered." She looked at the paper, then at me, then at the small red light on the phone at her elbow that had begun to blink as if reminded of its job. "I'll get that printout," she said quietly and vanished into the back. We stood with our ordinary bodies among all the ordinary bodies waiting for their ordinary medicines. And I felt the unreliability of the word ordinary. The teenager next to me rocked on his heels and asked the air, "Is today the day?" As if destiny might work the counter and answer him between customers. I wanted to tell him, "Yes, every day is, and some days tell you their names." The supervisor returned with the printout and a man in a blazer who introduced himself as compliance. He said the word like a benediction. On the paper, a paragraph glared: "Order placed, order cancelled. Order placed, authorized by *Young, Victoria digital stamp, proxy access, *Young, Daniel, *flags, research code, expedited disbursement." "Pre-authorization override." "Who overrides?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from slicing the room. "Anyone with the right password," the compliance man said. "Or anyone given proxy by the holder of the password, and you can see who typed the password." Isaacson asked. "We can see what device it came from," he said. "And we can see where that device was last night." He tapped a line near the bottom. "Home IP." I felt the floor tilt and calmly refused it my balance. "Is there a recording of consent?" I asked. "A video, a signature rendered with a human hand, a sentence where I say my own name?" He shook his head. "Not for a refill, for the original. Perhaps for the writer if one was filed through the insurance portal, yes. But that would live with the insurer." "It lives in my daughter's screenshots," I said. "And my daughter believes in evidence." The compliance man cleared his throat. "We'll be suspending all orders under your name pending a formal review. If anyone attempts to reactivate, the alert will ping the board and a security liaison. I suggest you change your passwords." "My husband changed them for me," I said. And the sentence sat between us like a small, awkward animal. "You'll need to change them back," he said gently. We left with nothing in our hands and more in our possession than the pharmacy could have given us. In the parking lot, Isaacson exhaled. "I don't like how practiced they were back there," he said. "Practice means precedent. Maybe we are not the first story with these rhymes." I said, "Maybe we are the first to refuse the ending." We stood by our cars like conspirators, hoping the world would let us be citizens again. And that was when my phone rang with a number I recognized so completely that my body almost obeyed it by habit. "Daniel." I answered. "Hi, where are you?" he said, not like a question but like the first brick in a wall. "At the library." I lied out of instinct, then caught myself and changed the tense, as if grammar could be a shield. "I was at the library. I'm running errands. Your mother says you didn't stay the night." "My mother says many things." He ignored that. "We should talk face to face." "We will," I said. "But not yet." A pause. I could hear paper in his hand, the slick whisper of a brochure or a printout. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said. The tone he used when Grace was small and insisted on sleeping with every stuffed animal to ensure none felt abandoned. There was a mix-up. "These things happen." I updated the writer because we talked about your symptoms and the neurologist's wait list was months long and you were suffering. I moved things along, that's all. "You forged my consent," I said, surprised by how steady the words sounded. "You changed clocks I didn't want changed, Vic," he said, and the nickname slid warm over an old bruise. "I manage risk. I did what I always do. I prepared for the worst so that if it came, we were covered." I couldn't watch you spin and do nothing. You did something, I said. Too much of something. For someone else's chart. Silence. Then, carefully. What chart? The woman who called last night, I said. The one whose husband wants an answer so badly he is borrowing other people's lives. People make mistakes, he said. Systems make mistakes. Did you talk to anyone at the clinic without me there? I asked. Another silence. The sound of paper being folded into a shape that might comfort him. Vic, I'm your husband. That isn't an answer. I'll be home. At noon, he said. Let's be reasonable. I will not be home at noon, I said. And hung up before I could apologize for one more sentence that did not require my apology. Isaacson watched me with the particular kindness of a person who knows how much energy it takes to hold your ground. He'll try to pull you back into the narrative, he said. It's what people do when they see you revising. I'm writing in ink, I said. Let's keep moving. We spent the rest of the morning in small, precise maneuvers. I met the social worker Isaacson trusted, Marta, with a voice like a wool sweater, and told my story twice, the second time slower, as if laying bricks. We filed a notice with the hospital's ombudsman. We alerted the insurer's fraud department, which responded with algorithmic blandness, and then, after Marta used 3 words that insurance companies treat like lightning: documentation, liability, restitution, became suddenly human. By mid-afternoon, the day felt like a chessboard near endgame, the pieces many, the options fewer, the outcome undecided but inevitable. I texted Grace to stay away until I said otherwise. She sent me a selfie with Priya, both of them wearing green face masks and holding up the skillet like a trophy. We're fine. Priya's mom wants to adopt you. She wrote. She says anyone who teaches their daughter to read policy like poetry is welcome here. At 4, I went to the library because I needed the quiet shape of it around me. The librarian with the owl pins saw me and, without remark, slid a small manila envelope across the desk. Inside, a USB drive. On the outside, a sticky note. You didn't get this from me, but public terminals remember more than they should. Clear your trail. I looked up and she winked as if to say, you're not the only one writing a myth today. I sat under the painted maple and opened my notebook again. Page 2. What comes next if I choose not to flinch? 1. Call the woman who called me to tell Grace the truth the way you want her to remember it. 3. Decide whether leaving is an action or an outcome. For if outcome, prepare. If action, begin. I dialed the number from last night. It went to voicemail on the 3rd ring. The message was a woman's voice holding itself together with staples. You've reached Mara, she said. Leave what you can't keep. I'll call back when the house sleeps. Leave what you can't keep. I left my name in the sentence that had become my passport. I'm the woman whose chart is pretending to be yours. I closed my eyes and let the library settle around me like a cloak. A child somewhere giggled into a book as if its pages were ticklish. 2 students argued gently about whether history repeats or just stutters. In the far corner, an old man slept sitting up, his mouth open. A small bird of rest perched there unafraid. When I opened my eyes again, the light had shifted, honeying the tables, and a shadow stood at the end of the aisle. Daniel. His suit was the color of decisions, his smile the rehearsed one that closes deals and arguments. He held no flowers, no apology, only a folder that matched the one in my bag, and I understood, with the clean clarity a fever sometimes gives. He had decided the library was our neutral ground because he believed in optics. He approached, careful not to be noticed by the librarian who noticed everything. He sat across from me without asking, placed the folder on the table between us like a treaty, and said, in a voice pitched not to travel, you've scared Grace, you've scared Grace, I said. He inhaled, exhaled, recalculated. This is unnecessary, Vic. I have the emails. I have the care plan. I have the notes from your dizzy episodes where you describe the room tilting and sound stretching. I have the neurologist's preliminary opinion. He tapped the folder, evidence. So do I said, and tapped mine. We sat there with our 2 stacks of stories like competing Bibles. Around us the library performed its serene pageant, pages turning, chairs scraping. A printer spitting out a quiz someone would fail and recover from. Outside, the day drew itself toward evening with the generous slowness of late summer. Come home, he said finally, the words soft as bread. We can sort this, we can go to the clinic together. I will stand wherever you want me to stand. I will say whatever makes you feel safe. I don't want to feel safe, I said. I want to be safe. His eyes flickered. The only sign that I had landed a blow. I am not the enemy. Then who altered my file? I asked. Whose device? Whose password? Whose override? The system, he said. The system used our Wi-Fi, I said. He leaned forward, hands on the table. Wedding band glinting under the library's kind light. What do you want from me, Victoria? I want you to tell me the truth as if you believe I can survive it, I said. I want you to tell me why you signed us up. To be the solution to someone else's problem. I want you to tell me whether you are the man who catches a grocery bag before it splits or the man who will let it split, so he can prove the strength of the new one he bought without asking me what I liked. His jaw worked. For a heartbeat, I saw the man I married, a boy, really terrified of failure and furious at the ways love refuses to be a controlled experiment. Then he put the mask back on, reached for the folder, opened it, and slid a single page toward me. At the top, the logo of a private research institute. Below, * Compassionate Access Program. * my name typed where a blank waited. And beneath that, a line that made the room grow very quiet. * Financial incentive payable upon enrollment. To designated household representative. * I stared at the amount, large enough to lift debts, small enough to be called practical, and felt the library tilt and right itself and tilt again. Somewhere, a child sneezed and a mother whispered * bless you * to the page. The air smelled suddenly of dust and something like Betrayal's aftershave. Daniel mistook my silence for comprehension, aligning with his. I did it for us, he said softly, for Grace, for the house, for your mother's care. If the treatment worked, we win. If it didn't, we had money to. He stopped. He was not a monster. He had simply negotiated with the darkness and convinced himself he was haggling in daylight. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated against the table. A text lit the screen from an unknown number. I lifted it, read, and felt the whole chapter turn. * This is Mara, he knows. He's on his way to the pharmacy. Don't be at your house. Don't be anywhere that can be described as yours. If you have the proof, meet me where the river splits. Bring only what you can carry. * Daniel watched my face change and reached for the phone with a speed that surprised me. I was faster. I slid the device into my pocket, stood with a calm I did not possess, and gathered my folder. I have to go, I said. Home, he said. Toward the truth, I said. I walked past the Alpin librarian who pretended to be fascinated by a stack of donated paperbacks and who, as I passed, breathed the smallest blessing into the air. Run outside. The late light poured like syrup down the street. The library doors sighed shut behind me. I did not look back to see if Daniel followed. I already knew he would. The note in my bag, the one that started the new version of my life, felt suddenly warm against my hip, as if the words on it could generate heat when believed. I turned toward the river, toward the place where water divides and keeps going, and I began to move. Under the fading light, I followed the road toward the river where it split in two. The place Mara had named. My phone buzzed once. Grace, I'm safe. Don't worry about me. Just finish this. I pressed the message to my chest, then slipped it away. Mara was waiting on the bank, her hair pulled back, her eyes sharp from too many sleepless nights. She held her own folder, battered and swollen with papers. They did the same to me, she said before I spoke. Signed my name, ordered drugs that weren't mine. Promised my husband answers if he let them use me as proof. He believed them. I almost did too. We traded folders like witnesses in a trial. The stories matched, forged authorizations, money disguised as care. Husbands convinced that risk was love. Behind us, footsteps crunched. Daniel. He stepped into the clearing with that calm smile, as though this were a negotiation over dinner plans. Vic, come home. You don't need her. You don't need this drama. I fixed everything. I lifted the note from my bag, the first one. The seed of all this, run from your family now, I held it out between us. You planted this fear when you chose money over me. You call it preparation. I call it betrayal. For the first time, his face cracked. I was trying to save us. No, I said. You were trying to control the ending, Mara pressed. Record on her phone. I laid the folders open to the night air. Pages rustled like wings. Daniel realized too late that the story was no longer his to write. By morning, compliance officers had both sets of evidence. The Institute launched its own review. Daniel was asked to leave the house until hearings were complete. Grace moved in with me at my mother's, Skillet still by the door, her laughter sharp and saving. One evening, as we sat drinking turmeric tea, Grace asked, "So what do we do now?" I looked at her, at my mother humming softly in her chair. At the river beyond the window carrying everything forward. We stop running from our family. I said, we start building one worth running toward, and for the first time in weeks, the world felt steady beneath my feet. 3 years later, the river still runs past my mother's porch, steady as breath. Grace is 24 now, hair longer, eyes sharper. She finished school and works at the clinic where she first learned to read policies like poetry. Sometimes, she jokes she became a doctor's shadow because of the man who nearly rewrote my life, Daniel. He faded into courtrooms and depositions, into long statements that never answered the right questions. We don't speak. That absence, once jagged, is now smooth, a scar that proves healing is possible. Mara lives 2 towns over. We meet for coffee once a month. Survivors know how to listen without asking too much. Between us, silence is no longer fear, it is rest. My mother's memory drifts further each season. Yet when I brew turmeric tea, she always smiles and says, "Your father believed this kept sorrow away." I tell her he was right, and for a while she believes me. As for me, Victoria Young, 48 then, 51 now, I no longer run, I walk, I write. I play the old piano until wrong notes become their own kind of music. The note that once warned me to flee is pressed in a frame above my desk. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. Sometimes salvation arrives on paper, folded small enough to hide in a purse, large enough to change a life. And when the river splits, I follow both branches. With my eyes, knowing whichever way it bends, it carries me forward.